Right, thank you very much for coming. We are four. Julie from Imperial on the end, Alex Nottingham, Susie Northampton, myself from Durham. We are here, we hope to stir things up a little bit. We don't have the answers, we have a few questions, we have some thoughts, and I hope then after a few words from us we can turn it over to you and we can get some good discussion, some practical things going on. We hope it will be purposeful and provocative, but also positive and practical. And we hope that maybe you'll take some kind of genuine concrete action as a result of something that comes out of today, whether that's going away and reading something, whether it's going away and re-examining your materials, starting a similar conversation with colleagues or whatever. We hope you will do something coming out of today. We talk a lot about ideas, but I think we also need to take some action on some of these things, and we hope that you will. So the basic format is that we have four short presentations, one from each of us. I'll start with classroom perspective on purposes, and then we have Alex looking at things from a practitioner perspective, Susie from academic staff perspective, and then Julie from the institutional perspective. And we're going to intersperse those with some video footage of interviews that we collected with stakeholders in some of our institutions to give some extra dimensions and perspectives on this question of purposes, the thread and theme of purposes. And after each talk, we'll give you just about 30 seconds. We're going to throw quite a lot out at you, and we'll probably talk for about 40 minutes or so, but we're going to punctuate each of those things with about 30 seconds for you to just write down a couple of questions for us, for each other, for your institutions or whatever, and then at the end you can throw those at us and each other, and hopefully we'll have a bit of a fight. So, I'm going to start then. Actually, I'm going to start my timer because otherwise I'm going to get into trouble for going over time. So, I'm going to start with classroom perspectives on purposes. So what are our students' purposes in the EAP classrooms that we work in? Well, they're clearly very diverse, and increasingly so. Some of our students are here for academic research careers, but some of them are not. Some of them are only looking for stable jobs, some of them want to get away from home, and some may be here fulfilling the dreams of their parents rather than their own dreams. Students are often very active choice makers, and sometimes those choices surprise us. I asked our MAT-SOL students once, why did you come to Durham? Research-led institution. One of the students said, it's near Newcastle Airport. My first choice was York, too hard to get home, so I chose Durham. Not what we expected. So there's a lot of diversity here. How do we cater for that kind of diversity in our EAP teaching and learning? Well, I think there may be ways, but I think we need to think differently about a few things first, in materials, in teaching, in training. Ed Catkull, who you may know as one of the main creative leaders behind the company Pixar, the animation studio that created Toy Story, he has a wonderful book called Creativity Inc. And in the book he talks about the axioms in the workplace that often lead working life. Be balanced, trust the process. And he talks about how sometimes the original tasks and meaning and things that got you to trust the process sort of disappear, and you end up carrying around the handle of the axiom, and people believe that just saying trust the process will somehow make everything work. And he calls this the suitcase handle problem, that you have the security of the handle, not realizing that you've left the suitcase and the content behind. And I think we have the suitcase handle problem in EAP, and I want to give you a couple of examples. So at language level, I think that EAP has inherited a view of language and pedagogy that separates language from the original conditions of its use and of its production. I think research work into corpus has a danger of taking us in that direction. Research work in corpus-type linguistics does the data mining, the text mining, finds these patterns, the disciplinary differences. But I think there's the danger then of separating that from the values and practices and purposes and knowledge that gave rise to that language practice in the first place. I think we see a similar thing in textbooks, potentially. One or two of the newer EAP textbooks are research-informed in the sense of drawing on corpus work, but again, have a tendency to separate the language from the knowledge, practices, purposes, and people that gave shape to it in the first place. So I think potentially we're separating this richness of values and practices and purposes and reducing context to the relative paucity of linguistic cotext and corpus keyword searches. It's not inevitable, but I think the research method can get lost in translation and promote some practice madness. Second example, at a slightly higher level of discourse in genre, not in the research literature, but I think in curriculum and practice, many of us have a view of genre as text type. And this leads to materials and pedagogies that teach genre as a convenient template into which we drop content. And again, we're separating the people and the practice that shape and reshape those texts. And so that's the view often that students take away. And it's illustrated by a PhD student that came to us for an in-sessional tutorial and asked, where do I put the counter-argument in my PhD thesis? Third example, at practitioner level, I think we have this same suitcase handle problem in the relationship between EAP as a field of research and EAP curriculum and practice. There's a disabling and disempowering divide between EAP textbooks, classroom practice, and research. And I think we need to find better ways of enabling teachers to see and exploit the richness of the original suitcase, the values, the practices, the purposes, from the handle that is sometimes all that gets left on the page of the lesson. So what are some ways forward? Well, I think we clearly need to keep the handle and the suitcase connected in our thinking, in our training, curriculum, and in teaching and learning. And I think we need what I'll call pedagogies of purpose. And so today, clearly, that means two things. We need to see context and take it seriously, and we need to see knowledge and knowledge practices. Seeing context and taking it seriously means seeing those values and practices and seeing how they can impact on learning. So to take one example, the passive. From a pedagogical grammar perspective, the passive is merely a transformation. You demote the subject and you promote the object. From a functional grammar perspective, we get a little bit more useful and we think about information structure and the fact that one thing is given prominence over another. But I think if we remember the values and practices of disciplinary communities, we get not just to the what and the how, but also to the why. So in science, for example, well, the knowers, the academic researchers, matter less in the discourse than do the hypotheses and the results and the theories and the insights that they generate. And so naturally in our texts, we want to highlight the latter and background the former. There are linguistic resources to do that. The passive is one. Nominalization is another. And I think when we keep these connections, we can give the students a sense of the why, of the organizing principles. We need to see knowledge and we need to see knowledge practices. The sociologist of education, Basil Bernstein, recognized that there were relations to knowledge. We talk a lot in education about status and ideology and power ideology. But he also recognized that there are relationships within knowledge itself. There's not just social power, but there's epistemic power. Or as Michael Young puts it, there's knowledge of the powerful, but there's also powerful knowledge. And language plays a big part in this. But pedagogical grammar doesn't cut it. And to be slightly provocative maybe, I don't think Swalesian ESP genre does either. Swalesian genre teaches recipes for conformity, not tools that empower students to make meanings of their own. When we see knowledge, we see language differently. So to take another example, nominalization. Nominalization is useful to our students because it's powerful knowledge, because of what it does to meanings. It takes an event and pulls it out from its original context, enabling generalizations and applications to new contexts. Michael Halliday has argued that the rise of nominalization in the English language itself coincided with the Enlightenment and the rise of science, and I don't think that's a coincidence. So there's social power in academic communities that produce the discourse, but there's also epistemic power in aspects of those discourses. And I think we need pedagogies that separate the two and give students awareness of the first, the power, but tools for the second, knowledge-making practices. So what needs to change? Well, I think we need to change our view of students from being just discourse analysts to being ethnographers, teachers too. And that means enabling students and teachers to develop strategies that see these people and practices underneath the text, underneath the language, and get them towards the why of things are being used in this way. And I think that can be done with all students, not just higher level ones. We need to bring knowledge into the curriculum, and that's not the same as teaching content. It means separating knowledge from the knowers that produced it and building pedagogies that enable us to see how the two are valued differently and given legitimacy differently by different communities and the different ways that language plays in enacting that. I think to do that, we need powerful theories that can also give us concrete tools for teaching and learning. I think one is systemic functional linguistics, SFL. Nessie and Gardner's work gives us one signpost in that direction. I think the work of Carolyn Coffin gives us another, her work in history discourse, where SFL gives the tools not just to dissect and describe the genres, but to sequence them in terms of linguistic complexity, but also cognitive complexity. And she shows the crucial part that language plays in building these epistemically powerful meanings. I think these are things that we need to work on and work with. Second example is the school known as social realism, the work of people like Basil Bernstein, Carl Mayton, that helps us to see knowledge itself, the knowledge that students and researchers and staff are engaging with, and how communities value and build it differently, but also helping us to see the expert and the apprentice knowers and how these matter or not in research and other practices and the texts that they produce. Finally, I think we need teachers to engage in scholarship, engage with scholarship, but with the specific purpose of doing translation work. The research insights and how they're written up have different logics from curriculum, different logics from pedagogy. And while there might be issues of workload and access and things that I think we'll pick up earlier, I think this is a crucial area where teachers can take some ownership through becoming recontextualizers of research knowledge. Phil Durrant this morning gave an excellent talk on corpus work, but then qualitative analysis of that gets at language functions and meaningful distinctions between disciplines. But I think there's a danger. I think we need to be careful not to lose that when these insights get translated into the curriculum and into the classroom. We don't want to take the corpus handle and leave the sort of values and practices suitcase behind. But I think we can go further and ask what are the principles that generate those patterns in the first place. So, to close, I think we need to take context seriously and we need to see knowledge. And in that way, I think we can reconnect the language handle to the values and practices suitcase, and it gives us a way of seeing through to more fruitful ways of thinking and designing and teaching. To return to an earlier example, the ESP model of genre paints a map as big as the territory, but the territory is rapidly changing, and we don't know what the destinations might look like in 10 years' time or even 5 years' time. So we need to go beyond this, not just to map making, but to pedagogies that help us see how and why those seas and mountains formed in the first place, enabling students to map their own journeys, whether they're academic or other. We need this for the diversity of the purposes in our classroom, for academia, for the workplace, or whatever. And we need this to prepare our students with the strategies and tools for uncertainty, not certainty. Thank you. Oh, yeah, sure.
Can we just ask you now, please, to take 30 seconds or so to maybe write down any reflections or questions you might have, because once you've heard 3 more of us talk, you might have forgotten them. Take that off me.
I don't know. Susie, is it video next or me?
It's a video.
Video.
Just
need to understand what the academic purposes are of a given department, of a given student at a given stage in their career before we can presume to teach English for academic purposes. In other words, it's not a blanket definition. It doesn't cover all areas, even of grammar, because for a given student, particularly at Imperial, there's a wide range of grammar errors that really have no impact on meaning. So we can't simply teach what we've learned as applied linguistics and make that applicable to every student. Here, in particular, a lot of what we need to be doing is quite teacher intensive in terms of the learning that the teacher needs to go through to be able to teach to the student, because our students are very, very time poor. They expect to take away from the classroom not something about language, but something that they can actually use instrumentally to write. So a lot of what we are doing, for example, and what can be extended certainly to students at PhD level, and I think even at any level, is to look at very, very good models of what their targets are. So instead of going bottom up and trying to build the language, we need to look at what it is essential that they can do to fulfill those targets. And some of those things will be grammar driven, some will be vocabulary driven, if you like, some will be writing skills driven, but I think we need to restrict what we're doing as far as possible to that target. And that does mean a lot of deconstructing of the target piece that they're heading for. So for example, a simple example actually is with an MSc report, where in order to write it correctly, the student can't start it from first principles, as it were. They've got to look at the way the questions are structured and feed that structure into their response. And that will, if we've done the work correctly and we've seen the match between the request from the tutor and the product at a good level, then we can start matching those up and teaching specifically and only those things. And I think it's the only that is the issue here, is that it gets very interesting, and we're all here in this business because we find language very, very interesting, but we have to accept that our students actually don't find it as interesting as we do. What should be happening in science is that you're effectively teaching a kind of a scaffold for information that is the same for all sciences, and the information slots into that scaffold. So and the scaffold is modelling an introduction, modelling a report, and those models become your scaffold, and then within that scaffold you need to identify only what's necessary to make that thing run, to make that model run. And if you start going into areas that you find interesting, or just expanding vocabulary, certainly in science, you're trying to reduce vocabulary, actually not expand it, because the terminology needs to remain stable and consistent. And we know that from editors of science journals who flip back to the original word if you start messing around and changing it. And we see that as language teachers. Students like style. They've been told through high school to extend their range of vocabulary. So they mess around with a thesaurus, never being quite sure actually how far away they've got from the original term. And they start thinking that determining something is the same as identifying it, without being aware that these have got quite specific meanings. So not only are they not aware of how far they've gone from the original, their reader is likely a non-native speaker as well, because it's science, and the reader has got the job to do twice. So that's why we try, and there are areas, certainly in science, and the same is true of law, I'm sure, and increasingly in social science as well, where there is an attempt to be more rigorous and to be clearer.
Right, I'm going to talk about something a bit different. I'm going to talk about the practitioner and identity. What I'm going to do first of all is just talk about some challenges and issues related to practitioner identity, and then move on to something a bit more purposeful. So I'm going to depress you first, and then hopefully something else will happen. What we do know about identity is that it exists in a context where EAP centres in the UK and elsewhere are subject to ideologies and policies that enforce a neoliberal agenda of increasing commodification, competition, marketisation, and the promotion of student as consumer. There are a litany of concerns centering around a lack of common titles for professional roles, roles that are poorly understood by others, no clear or appropriate career structure, promotion or reward systems, and there's also an increasing casualisation of teaching and teaching contracts. EAP academics are often divorced from practitioners in different departments, and practitioners get renamed as support workers, professional teaching-only staff. There's a recent and increasing tendency to privatise EAP, outsource it. So in case you didn't know, there's some money to be made out of EAP apparently. EAP as a profession also is quite capable of inflicting damage on itself. It's colluded in its own marginalisation to a certain degree, and has really been, from its origins, a poor relation to other departments and other academics. This sort of marginalisation perhaps can be attributed to its ESP legacy and the adopting the butler stance, where you support and serve departments. This kind of legacy of the butler stance is really perpetuated in the idea of EAP, especially in pre-sessional programs, which is kind of a factory-like existence where students are processed and packaged in the shortest possible time in order to be let loose in departments. The focus on study skills and language work sort of promotes and perpetuates an idea that EAP is intellectually vacuous. So all of that to cheer you up, but basically to say that this contributes very much to a fragile, somewhat disempowering and fragmented identity for practitioners. Now, we know all of that, we know the problems, and we've got an option. We can succumb to a somewhat fatalistic, defeatist and miserabilist view of the world, or we can think about identity as being an opportunity to think things through a bit differently. So we can think of identity as being future-orientated, as about possibilities of what we might be, who we aspire to be. We can redefine our purposes. We can shape rather than be shaped by social, educational and ideological forces, to try and envisage a different identity alongside a different purpose for EAP. Now, I can be a little bit presumptuous, but I wouldn't be presumptuous enough to know what that future holds. But I would argue that there are certain things that we can start thinking about in order to do that, collectively and individually. I think we need to have a very good critical understanding and assessment of the range of ideologies, theories, pedagogies and research that have shaped and informed EAP. I think we need to develop a deep understanding of the values, socio-economic forces and politics that frame local as well as global education and enactments of EAP. I think through a thorough and critical understanding, practitioners, that's us, can firstly begin to question, reaffirm or modify our own values, actions and commitments, and secondly, assess the extent to which our values are dissonant with the values that prevail, which leads to the question of how subversive can we be, or do we want to be? We need more inclusive and pluralistic identities to emerge that better represent the diversity of EAP and also federate the profession around a more comprehensive understanding of the needs of practitioners. Perhaps the most important thing is to focus our attention on praxis. We have a transformational role. That's one whether we like it or not. We have that role. The question is, what transformations do we aspire to, collectively and individually again? What are our purposes or purpose? What values and aspirations underpin our praxis? We need to seek ways to take advantage of our peripheral, liminal, slightly shadowy existence within the university. We need to transform curricula, and I'm talking about assessments, pedagogy. We need to focus on knowledge, both in its sociological form and epistemological form, to engender a more intellectually engaging environment for practitioners and students. We need to take knowledge seriously, not simply as a backdrop to language. We need to inhabit a context where our own development is embedded in teaching, not as an add-on or as an optional. We should expect more from ourselves and more from students. We need to engage in scholarly activity, and we need to do that with a range of communities of practice. We need to open up our endeavours to public scrutiny and critique and use by various communities to make our presence felt, to influence and engage other important communities of practices within the university and the higher education communities. We need not to turn inward, and we certainly don't need to be navel-gazing. We need to argue collectively and individually in a principled and informed way to exert pressure to change the values, structures that undermine those things that we wish to achieve. So our purpose, if you like, our identity, is one we have to forge. We have to find elbow room within contexts and structures and conditions which, as you know, are not always terribly favourable. Okay, that's me done.
So take another 30 seconds, write down anything that came from that, a question, a thought.
No, because I can't. I'm going to do myself. I'll break my neck.
You're going to stay there?
Yeah, I'm going to have to. Okay, hi. I've never spoken in a microphone before, it's horrible. Anyway, so I'm going to talk about academic staff, or what I would prefer to call subject specialists. So let's start by looking at some subject specialists talking about their students.
Sometimes the overseas students have a better fundamental grounding in scientific writing, which is a very different style of writing to general, say, journalistic writing, right? I think scientific writing should be very clean, sharp. I'm not one for drama. I like facts, and I like them to be delivered very in a nicely structured and easy to read way. So I think, you know, I'd like to see things which are at a high level for all students, but I think the thing that pains me the most is spending a lot of time correcting very basic English and grammar from students of any you know, whether they're overseas or not, is spending a lot of time correcting those basic things and not spending enough time with the students with the data, or with the data, in my case, on the screen, and or going out to the field and collecting data. That's really where I want to spend the interaction with the students, is sitting physically next to them, not sitting with my laptop with Word with track changes on, going through and correcting their English, because it's a necessary part of our job. It's part of the training we provide, but we should have other mechanisms, I think, within the college and just both here and in other places, to actually make sure that their English is to a good standard, so we spend more time being academics.
Yeah. We do have students that come to us from all over the world and find they settle very easily into the kinds of academic work we're asking them to do, but we also have a variety of students who, for a variety of reasons, find it very challenging to produce the kinds of essays, assignments, presentations, and so on that we ask them to do.
I guess I've become engaged with English for academic purposes because of a specific group of students that I tutor. We have quite a close relationship with the local Somali community, and there are a number of more mature Somali students that are studying here. They participate, they're keen, they bring a huge amount of personal experience and insights into the International Development Programme, but I guess one of the main challenges for them in terms of having their work recognised is the quality of their written English. And this was really when I first began to engage with this issue. This is really beyond, I guess, the bounds of the support that I can give them. We have departments here that can give advice on essay writing skills and structure, but I guess that the extra component that can really help these students get the grades that they deserve and get the recognition for the effort that they put in is this help with actually writing academic English. Having engaged with it a little bit recently, I actually think that maybe there is a broad range of students that could benefit from that, but that would probably consider that this wasn't something that they needed, because we do have challenges with the standard of written English, even from home students or from English students who have English as their first language.
The overseas students actually go through the different kind of measures to kind of be admitted to at least Imperial College and all the other universities. We don't have the same requirements for our EU or our UK students, right? We don't have a required level of English. We don't stipulate a C and above for English language from GCSE, for example, right? And yet we sort of make those stipulations for the overseas students to be admitted. So yeah, we get the kind of UK students come in and they have very poor command of English because they've spent time doing maths, physics, chemistry and things during their A-levels, which haven't necessarily required them to write a cogent argument longhand.
Don't. Oh, phew. Almost. So subject specialists see problems with English levels and academic literacies of their students. They don't seem so much to make the distinction between native speaker or non-native speaker. They're just looking at the students in front of them. And I guess in my part of the talk, I pose more questions than anything else. I'm like, why does this prevail? I mean, if subject specialists don't see it in their classroom, why do we maintain this divide where learning development units tend to look after home students and EAP units tend to look after international students? Is that us defining our own purpose that way? Is it the institution dictating that it has to be that way? And if so, why? Why does that happen? Who's best placed to kind of make that decision? It seems to me that do we do ourselves a disservice being called EAP, English for academic purposes? Does that then kind of put some home students off? Should we be LAP, language for academic purposes, which would then make me a LAP practitioner, and I'm not sure I want to be one of those. I'll stick to the day job. So I want to spend some time thinking about who is best placed to help students, and I want to just show you another short video. You see, I'm a con again. Where are we?
Another reason I don't want to be correcting my students' English is because mine is not flawless itself. And in fact, people like yourself are much better trained in the mechanics of science writing, I like to think of it. So I would rather, I'd want the top people training my students in all those areas, hence I would want you guys be teaching about the mechanics, not particularly about geology, which is where I come in. It's actually how do you construct an argument and how do you construct a sentence and a paragraph and actually building it from literally the words up to the whole paper. I think a lot of academics struggle with that, and I kind of have charged myself with improving my level of scientific writing by attending, kind of courses that have been available for academics. But I think you'll always face a challenge that lots of academics think they're brilliant scientists, therefore they're brilliant writers, but it's clearly not the case.
I need to know both how to help my students, but also where to send them for further support themselves in their writings, in preparing for presentation, whatever that might be. I don't really, as a subject specialist, but not a specialist in teaching students in a second or third language, have probably the full range of skills that I might have if I was a specialist in that area. So whereas I can tell the students all about film and television studies, I really feel like I need some kind of further support in how to guide those students through the difficult problems that they have in their working lives at the university, also in their assessments.
Okay, I think so. When we think about who's best placed to help students, we need to remember that subject specialists are reluctant dwellers in a strange land too. It's not just us, and we need to kind of come together and help each other navigate our insecurities with content or language to then sort of best help support the student. But how do we work together? Well, I think there's two key things here, really. I think EAP in exceptional cases is a partnership, and when it works best with subject specialists, but more generally, it is at best misunderstood and at worst invisible. And it's this visibility that I think is the key to kind of resolving this issue a little bit. So the last video that I will ham-fistedly play.
Interestingly, I've talked to a student about this yesterday because university websites, as they grow and change, become very big and complex, and it's often difficult to find the right information at the right time when you need it. So the support information isn't easily findable on our website, I don't think. But also, talking to the students, there is some kind of confusion from this. So it's not just me that's confused, but there's some general confusion about how to access that help. It may be that support is there and I don't know how to access it, or it may be that support isn't there. And obviously, you know, what I need to do as a responsible teacher is kind of dig more and try and find it out if it's there. But also, it would be fantastic if we had somebody come and talk to the department, or perhaps somebody that had subject-specific responsibility, or even faculty-specific responsibility for working with our community of international students. Some way to, because often I think language can be a barrier to actually finding out information about help and support. So, you know, if you're struggling to read the details of your assignment, you might also struggle to kind of navigate a website.
Okay, so, I mean, are we invisible because our websites are rubbish? Maybe. But one thing that strikes me is how visible learning development units are on university websites, and how they have a lot of resources there, and there's a lot of crossover, there's a lot of resources about critical thinking and critical writing and critical reading, but there's no mention of EAP there. And I wonder why that is. I wonder, maybe it's just the institutions I've worked in, but it seems like there's clearly a problem of being able to find the information, find the different places that you need to go to for support. And I think there's a deeper problem here about visibility, and I think it kind of ties in nicely with what Alex was saying, is that we need to legitimate EAP. We say it's a discipline, but where? There's limited academic courses, there's no EAP departments in the academy sense. EAP research centres, are there any? Do any exist? And where do we publish? Do we just publish in EAP journals, or do we look at publishing within other disciplines? We need to raise awareness of us and what we do. We say that no one knows what we do, but what steps do we take to actually go out there and say what we do, to make ourselves visible? People want us. People want our help. We need to research not within our own silo. We need to go, like Alex was saying, you know, in other departments and other communities of practice within in the institution. And I was reading Carl Mayton's Analysing Knowledge Claims and Practices, Languages of Legitimation, and he was talking about cultural studies as a discipline, and quite a few parallels struck me. It felt to me that you could just take cultural studies out and put EAP in. So I'm going to cheat again and read a few quotes. So Mayton discusses the sustained marginality and relative invisibility of cultural studies as a distinct named area of study within British higher education. I think the same is true for EAP. Cultural studies can be characterised as having occupied positions of relatively lower status within the institutional field throughout its emergence and development. Again, I think the same is true of EAP. Several research centres in cultural studies emerged on the margins of existing university departments. Well, at least they had some. I don't think we do. Cultural studies endured low status in the eyes of actors within established disciplines. Cultural studies is often considered to have been a growth area within higher education, and new journals, textbooks, conferences and courses which claim cultural studies among their central concerns have proliferated. However, in terms of numbers of departments, degree courses and students, cultural studies as a named area of study remains a relatively small-scale phenomenon. If it has found a place in the sun, this has largely been within other academic subjects rather than in its own right. The institutional history of cultural studies is one of origins in the indices of the curriculum and infiltration via existing subject areas. There's only two more. Cultural studies is often visible more as an adjunct or adjective to more established disciplines than as a distinct entity within higher education. And courses and departments of cultural studies have typically been established as the result of individual initiatives. And I know that's a lot of quotes, but I was just reading it and it just struck me that this was just the same. And that was quite pertinent to me. And I think what we need to do is we need to legitimate EAP within the academy. We need to work to identify our legitimating discourse and consider our institutional trajectory. I knew I should have chosen a different word. Only when subject specialists see EAP in their image will they see its purpose, our purpose. And I was talking to B, I hope you don't mind me name dropping you, B Bond, earlier, and we were talking about how important it is that, you know, academics don't understand what an EAP tutor is, but a lecturer in EAP, maybe they understand that more. You know, saying that going to research seminars, being visible within the institution, talking the same talk and walking the same walk, if you like, is what will get us visible within the institution. So EAP needs to develop as a distinct entity. That means shedding some of its historical and current associations, unlearn its past, and relearn what it is to be EAP in order not to fall between the cracks. And that's what worries me, is that it might.
Again, can you just spend a little bit of time thinking about that, making some notes, reflecting on what Susie has said?
Start with those in a minute. No, you have that.
We're a world-leading global institution prosecuting an immense research agenda in engineering, science, maths, medicine, business, and translating that into world-leading education, creating the generation of leaders for the future, both scientists, engineers, medics, business leaders, entrepreneurs. That's our academic purpose. Mm-hmm. We're a global institution. We have over 100 students with over 137 countries from across the world. But we teach, assess, practice. Academic practice is in English, and so whilst we attract some of the most talented students from across the world, who are, I think, probably even more talented because they function in multiple languages, we should do everything we can to enable their success. So English and supporting that, both in written, verbal, whole sets of forms of communication, a really crucial underpinning for our academic mission. So I think that the whole people about having a Centre for Academic English is across all levels, because we can get a bit obsessed about undergraduates. It's as much of an issue, I think, for a research student as it is an undergraduate. Across all levels, this is a key element of supporting students in achieving their success. We create the conditions to enable them to do brilliant things.
My diagnosis about our relationship with the English, academic English, is that we are not reading properly the academic English, because part of our daily work is read a lot of papers, and we are just reading the results, reading the conclusions, but we are not reading the entire papers itself. So, and I think this is a consequence, because the people that is evaluating your work, your partners, your blind partners in the revision of your papers in some journal, they are scientists like you, so maybe they are involved in the same this kind of lack of accuracy about the academic English properly. I would like to improve my English, my academic English, as much as possible, but it's difficult because I have to follow the speed of the research. So if I have to read, I don't know, 10 papers per week, I don't have enough time to be reading properly the academic sentences and try to make my own library of sentences, and so yes, it's a problem. So even in the research itself, don't have enough time. You have to do that in your own time, maybe in your free time. Try to improve your academic English from your research and what are you reading to your work, not another things.
Okay, I hope you're not suffering from numb bum syndrome. I'll try and make this quick. It's also not a promotional video for Imperial College either. I sort of realized I did a lot of the videoing. I want to talk about the institutional aspect of purposes. And as Alex has touched on earlier, and Steve and Susie, there are two, I suppose, conflicting purposes in the current world. There's Stephen Schwartz talks about the outsider view, which is very sort of instrumental, it's very utilitarian. It's about training students for the world of work. And that's one purpose that seems to be infiltrating academic institutions. At the same time, there's the insider perspective from the academics, where we hope, I count myself as an academic, why not, that will somehow help these students gain through the acquisition of knowledge, the transformation of knowledge, sort of 50 years of self-fulfillment. Stefan Collini talks about this, and he talks about how universities, this is quite an outrageous idea. No other institutions that we know of have this as their primary purpose, to create these people who are self-fulfilled, who engage with higher ideals, higher thinking, and so on. It is quite outrageous, but I'm glad I'm part of that world, because I want to be a little bit outrageous. And I hope that's what I find stimulating about working at a university. And at the same time, you know, he also talks about the fact that we need to talk about universities in more fruitful terms than just talking about the usual cliches of contributing to economic growth, and those do dominate public discourse on the topic. So universities at the moment, they're sailing their boats on very choppy waters, and I think we're sitting in an EAP harbour hoping that particular storm will blow over, and we probably don't have to engage with it too much, because it's their problem, not ours, but we are in the institution, we're part of the institution. We should be engaging with those problems and helping the institutions find their way through it. So that's just something to throw out there. At the same time, sort of looking, how do universities themselves express their purpose? There are these dual notions of the utilitarian and the more idealistic view of the purpose, but how do universities themselves state their academic purpose? And for me, what's been interesting, when I tried to Google university mission statement, I got nothing. So I tried again, and I was using the wrong word. We don't have missions anymore. The word has now shifted, again, from this sort of higher ideal to strategy. So we've gone probably from what might be a sort of more religious, spiritual word to a much more perhaps military or business-like term. And I find that fascinating, how the language of our context is shifting because of these dual pressures on the institutions we work in. However, when you actually look at the statements themselves that express this strategy, I feel a little bit more uplifted about what's going on. And I just selected a few quotes from various anonymous universities to share with you. One strategy is to increase the impact of their research, through obviously scholarly output, through public engagement, social enterprise activity, influence on public policy and professional practice. So obviously research is key. Secondly, they talk about nurturing and celebrating, which I think ties with my Vice Provost's statement about encouraging talent, to celebrating individual curiosity-driven research. And again, I like that idea. I think that's fun, it's interesting. Thirdly, they talk about marshalling expert perspectives, not just generating knowledge, but delivering a culture of wisdom, committed to the judicious application of knowledge for the good of humanity. They also talk about cross-disciplinary research, synthesizing knowledge, gaining fresh perspectives and wisdom, which requires a spirit of collaboration and a recognition that contributions are greater in such cases. They also talk about achieving progressive social, environmental, and economic benefits to humanity. Concern for sustainability, relationship with the environment, and contributing to the resolution of the world's major problems. And I ask you, how much do you think about those things on a daily basis in your job as part of these institutions? And I reckon not much. And when you talk to your students, I reckon you don't do that much either. And I've left it up to myself to be the most provocative. But it worries me. It worries me that at this BALEAP conference, nobody has talked much about knowledge. This is our currency. This is what we deal in. This is what our colleagues deal in. This is what the institutions deal in. This is what the academics deal in. This is what our students deal in. And we don't talk about it in this conference. I just find it fascinating, actually. Why? Why? Is it because we don't know that that's our business? Or are we afraid to go there because it's just too damn hard? Is it easier to talk about genre? Is it easier to talk about passives? Is it easier to talk about nominalization? I don't know, but I'm throwing it out there to be a wee bit provocative. I worry that we're too student-focused. I worry that we're gazing too much at our own navels, beautiful though they are. And as I said, so much is going on behind our backs within the institution. We're not engaging with those colleagues very much. On a daily basis, how often do you engage with the academics within your institution in relation to the time you spend with students? Is it a balanced engagement or is it not? And if not, why not? We're part of that wider sort of institution, where do we sit within that? Are we, I think as Susie said, are we sort of creating the problems that we discuss at these conferences time and time and time again? And if we are concerned about our status and we are concerned about our identity and concerned about our concepts of self, as Alex said before, these things are determined through our interactions with our community. And our community is not just the students, it's the institutions we work in and the institutions that pay us at the end of the day. So we can't just ignore the bigger picture and sort of focus on the micro detail of language and text. Oh, they've all gone quiet. Whoops. Oh, sorry. Okay, so on that jolly note, so I want to kind of boil it down into, you know, summarizing what I've just said. We do have, I think, 3 key areas of institutional activity that require a clear academic English purpose: around the competent communication of knowledge, around the literacy of native and non-native speakers, as we've seen, both in the workplace and by the HE employability agenda, and the acquisition of academic discourse that enables successful transitions into and between academic contexts. And I just want to talk a little bit more about the institutional context and the things that we need to get to grips with. One thing I think we need to talk about and discuss is cross-disciplinary research. How many of you heard about the Longitude Prize last year? Okay. This was revived last year after 300 years of not being revived at all. And it was putting out questions to the world, or to the UK at least, to say, what problems now do we need to solve? 300 years ago, it was about how to calculate longitude. And some of the things that came up, the question that won was, how can we prevent the rise of resistance to antibiotics? Other things that were thrown out, how can we restore movement to those with paralysis? How can we fly without damaging the environment? How can we help people with dementia live independently for longer? This is what our colleagues are doing. This is what they're talking about. This is what the students are working on. And how much on a daily basis are we talking about that in our EAP classrooms? Or are we just talking about the advantages and disadvantages of tourism because they've got an IELTS test next week? And I worry that we're not engaging with the questions that are going on around us in our institutions. And the solution to these problems is through cross-disciplinary collaboration. You're not going to solve it just through medics, just through engineers, just through scientists. And the boundaries between art and science are becoming blurred. People are talking about sci-art as a new thing. And it's one example from the Longitude Prize is how artists are helping scientists see data. And there's a particular case of helping them visualize protein sequence bundles. Don't ask me what they are. But it's the way that the world of academia is changing to respond to the questions that society needs answering and solving. People are working together in very different ways. How engaged are we with that through our teaching, through our daily practice? And I'm suggesting not much. And again, you can shout me down later on. But what's interesting for me is if this is the case, if the nature of academic work is becoming more cross-disciplinary, what does that mean for academic discourse? What does that mean for us as teachers of academic discourse? It suggests maybe a more standardized version of talk, because how are these people going to communicate otherwise? And I'm just curious about that. Is anyone doing research into that? Is anyone looking into how disciplines are communicating? Yeah, I mean in the audience, to sort of see how that's working. Because that's where we need to be if we want to survive in our institutions. We need to talk the talk, and we need to be switched on to what's going on around us. I think computer scientists are probably not included in that group. They seem to get more and more jargon-fueled to shut people out rather than to bring people in, but don't quote me on that. So I think that's one thing that we need to wake up to. The second thing we need to wake up to is the internet and its impact on institutional research. It's really, as Miguel said in the video, the speed of research and the speed of access to research is blindingly fast. And it changes the way that research is communicated. As Miguel said, you don't read the whole text, you just go for the results. And if you look at a lot of journal articles now, the IMRAD structure isn't really there in a lot of science texts. What you see now is you have introduction, results, and the methods are pushed back to the end of the text, because that's not important anymore in a sense. It's, I want to know what you've done, and I want to know what your results are. And the internet has helped create that. And again, how switched on are we to that when we sit and teach our students introduction, method, results, discussion? It's not like that anymore. And the literature reviews are sort of scattered through the academic text. They're not separated as a separate piece of an academic journal, certainly, and that may then feed back into the way that students are going to be asked to write their own academic research. We'll wait and see. Are we talking to academics to ask them about it? I don't know. Let's see, yes. The other thing is this internationalization of university communities. We've all talked about, well, they want the international students in because they bring in more money. But again, as Deborah said in the video, I think there is a desire to help students achieve success. I think there is a desire to create the conditions to help them, do what they're there to do. And hopefully that means we do have a reason to exist. Because if they are international by nature, then they do actually need EAP units like us to support those purposes and to support those practices. So we need, I think, to get our heads up off the EAP table, slightly looking beyond the students, and frame the work that we do in a way that's much more institutional facing, much more engaged with the activities of the institution, and talking the talk of our academic colleagues. How much longer have I got? Sorry, time's running out. Just a couple of other points I want to add to this. The staff members in the video confessed a little bit to concerns about their own academic language skills. And I thought that was very interesting. What do academics do or spend a lot of their time on? A lot of the time they spend writing bids to get money to do their research. Has anyone analysed as a genre the academic bid? Because surely we have a very significant role saying to academics, we can help you make your bids very successful because we know the key, the key words, the persuasive language, the rhetorical functions to get you that money. I'm sure somebody, if they sat down and looked at successful research bids and unsuccessful ones, you'd see something, and you could teach that. Wouldn't that be lovely? I think you'd be very popular, with the powers that be in your institution if you were to offer that kind of service. I think because we're so head on the desk, we don't see the blinding opportunities sort of right in front of us. Why aren't we doing things like that? So that, I'm just throwing a lot of these things out there. Other things that I'm very concerned about is, we've all talked that we're slightly marginal. In a sense, we're competing with other support units. I hate the word support, but I think that's true. In my own institution, the slots we're given are lunch times and Wednesday afternoons to do a bit of English support. But the graduate school are doing their support things at that time. The disability service have got sessions going on. So we're all competing for the same slots and the same students to support them in varying ways. And as Miguel said in the video, their timetables are already overloaded. How can they then find time to go to a session on plagiarism There's one being run by the English unit, there's one being run by the graduate school, there's one being run by the library. Which one do I go to? I don't know. They're all talking about plagiarism. What's the difference? We're not even joined up with our own institutions and other service providers, I hate that word, in our institutions. We need to talk to them. So finally, having waffled on, I think we do, as I said, need to change our purposes in this regard. All of those university strategies that I talked about earlier essentially have communication at their core. And that's our way in. If we can say, yes, we support these strategies because we can help through the skills that we have, the knowledge that we have to communicate those things, I think our lives would be a lot better. And the way forward perhaps might be to look at, certainly at Australia, the University of Sydney. They now have English proficiency as part of their curriculum in their sort of degree programs. Why aren't we doing that? Why are we so complacent in this country? So that's a kind of something I want you to think about. And I just want to finish on a quote that I hope is inspiring. I'm not sure. It's not from anybody in EAP, it's actually from Cecil Beaton, but I like it. Maybe he was talking about fashion or photography, but I think it's relevant to EAP. He says, be daring, be different, be impractical, be anything that will assert integrity of purpose and imaginative vision against the play-it-safers, the creatures of the commonplace, the slaves of the ordinary. And on that note, thank you very much. Okay, can you just take a little bit of time to make some notes, and then we'll...
Okay, so sorry to interrupt you. Are there any questions? Are there any questions, please? Sorry, I've just been reminded of my manners.
No, I mean like please. Questions.
Oh, no, he means... What did you say then? He said, how you want us to do this, because we were all talking, so I can hear what you want us to do.
Shout at us. Yes and no. I think one of the things that is rife in our pedagogy is conflating a constructivist view of learning with constructivist view of teaching. And we've inherited this view from EFL that says set things up and let people get on with it.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So I think there's a tendency in ELT, and I think we've inherited it in EAP, where we think that learning is individualistic and constructivist and organic, and we need to allow students to do it in their own way and find their own paths. But the danger is that the teacher steps out of the way. And I think we talk about students a lot, but I think students do need some mediation. Students need to be, they need to see the knowledge. Practitioners have an important part on the stage. I don't think we are guides on the side. I think we need to restage the sage and put teachers and practitioners and knowledge back at the center, because students don't do it on their own. And when we do, they fail. They may succeed in the language, but not in seeing how that language sort of enacts knowledge and knowledge practices. And I think the themes that we picked up are the things that we don't see being talked about. It's not that the student's absent from that, it's that we're always talking about the students and student learning, and I think we've left lots of other things out of the picture, and we need to kind of keep those things connected.
Do you need the microphone?
The thing that I think about when I I hear this is, it's like, to me, the thing that we need to think about is the demographic of who goes to higher education has changed dramatically in the last 20 years. We've got mass higher education, student mobility, and it's all about access. And that's seen as being liberating, it's seen as being good for people. But the higher education institution itself hasn't changed. We're still delivering higher education in the way that it looked for the last 100 years or so. So we haven't recognized that the people who are supposed to be benefiting from higher education are being put through a system that isn't necessarily fit for purpose anymore. And again, like when we heard from, I can't remember her role at Imperial, yeah, okay, that what she was talking about, we want students to be successful. But again, it's this argument that in order to be successful, you've got to do it through English. And if you have an institution like Oxford, where over 40% of the staff are international, if you've got an institution like Imperial, where again, a large number of the staff as well will be international, why does it all have to be done in English? Why can't we be thinking about different ways of talking about ideas and knowledge that are different? I think as an EAP practitioner and as somebody who teaches on a master's degree as well, increasingly I just don't think that the model that we use to teach in the university is fit for purpose. And we are, and I see it all the time with students who struggle with the model we haven't thought about how to change it. And I think that we as EAP teachers have a lot of insights into why the model isn't fit for purpose. And one of the things I do is I teach in-sessional support to HRM, Human Resource Management students. So I end up reading the literature on human resource management. And human resource management, you will notice that you no longer have a personnel department. You have a human resource management. And that was their attempt to get a seat at the big table, because the personnel department were firefighters who dealt with staff squabbles and problems in payroll. And they wanted to be on the management table, so they renamed themselves. They said that they were about being strategic, and that any good business who wants to be strategic needs to think about issues like line of sight and things like that. And I think that's something that we need to do. We need to think about, how do we get our seat at the big table? How do we consider ourselves, because we have a lot to offer our institutions. We're not at the big table, and how do we get there? And maybe I should spend more time talking to my HRM colleagues to learn more about how HRM got to the big table as a model.
Any comments? Another question? Any other question? You have one.
I was just wondering, what role could or should BALEAP take in facilitating these discussions or moving them forward? Or I'm not going to answer. I don't have an opinion.
We're all
right.
Okay. Yeah. It's not BALEAP as an institution. No, we're all BALEAP.
Well, that is something that was mentioned in the exec, having a lobbying group. Yeah. Is that something that you would add to that party? Yeah, why not? Would that have, I mean, it's all about visibility. Would an institution, saying, we're BALEAP, we'd like to come and speak to you, would that have a bit more impact, yeah? No, I think...
I don't know how we get that voice. Is it a collective voice? Is it an individual voice? Or is it institution by institution voice? I don't know. It just seems you need a voice, but I don't know. Is it stronger if we...
Can I, Susie, maybe I can say something there. I'm also a member of BAL, but I lurk. I don't go to the conferences or do much. But one of the things that struck me at the time when the committee were first thinking about these immigration procedures, and there were representations made to a parliamentary committee, BAL was able to pull together a bunch of specialists and very quickly establish a position that they could take to the committee. they may not have been quick, but we weren't able to do it at all. I was the chair at that time, and I felt completely unable to have a position on it because I didn't know enough about it, and because we didn't have, if you like, the gravitas behind us, and I think that's what you're calling for, to actually be able to stand up and say something. And we weren't viewed like the British Council, we weren't viewed like other kinds of bodies. So we are, I agree with you, we are not at the big table, we're not players. And I'm not sure how we position ourselves to get there, but you know, that's definitely a deficit for us.
I think one of the difficulties for us is the knowledge which we deal in, which is very elusive. I think language, which is the meaning-making resource which we work with, is invisible across the university, and unlike other disciplines, if that's what we are in, we can't just stay in our own little bunker, because we deal in applied linguistics, and you have to apply it across the rest of the university. And as the meaning-making resource of language is so elusive and is so difficult to see, for us, and even more so for people in the disciplines, I think our responsibility is to find ways to actually uncover this thing that we work with, language. And I think we have huge resources, from what I hear, in BALEAP, amongst us all. But I think we have to concert these and somehow bring them together in ways which are very sophisticated and do require the kind of deep scholarship which we've been hearing about, as well as practice. And this is the real difficulty, is how to combine deep scholarship with deep practice that will, at the same time, be recognizable by people who don't come from our discipline, work inside our practice, but are in their own disciplines and in their own practices. So I think that's a challenge, but I think there is lots of opportunity. Just last thing, I think that what you spoke about, essentially language as a social semiotic, which I think is at the heart of meaning-making in universities, is a good, powerful vision of language, which maybe can help to cohere some of what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and one of the things that I ended up having to cut from my bit was the work of people like Joan Turner, who talks precisely about that, about how language is often invisible until it goes wrong. And of course, the deficit model, the Butler stance that Alex was talking about, is what we've inherited. And so we sort of have this deficit model where we're dealing with the international students who get it wrong. And I think also the pedagogical grammars that we've inherited and tend to be using separate language from content, separate language from knowledge, and we forget that language is a key tool for building meaning, whoever it is that's writing or speaking. And I think absolutely, I mean, I mentioned SFL, but the semiotic perspective that keeps those things connected, I made the point that the Swalesian model of genre is perhaps in the classroom and curriculum something very useful, instrumental, because it gives us these text types and these shapes that we can plug into our courses and get students to learn very quickly. But the model of language that goes with it, there is no theory of language underpinning it. So you have corpus work that provides correlative views of language, but what happens then is that the research report or the essay or whatever sit alone, and the relationships between those are completely invisible. Whereas a more social semiotic perspective like SFL sees sort of underneath the underlying principles, and you have this intimate connection between how language builds text, builds culture, and the other way down. And I think if we keep those connections, then we have a perspective where language is no longer invisible, and we can work with academic staff, with home students, with international students, and see how language is essential to everybody. Not just for accuracy, but for building the kinds of sort of knowledge-based, epistemically powerful meanings that I was talking about. And I think one of our problems as language specialists is we have the wrong theory. We don't have the wrong theories of language. We have the right theories of language, but we need to be doing more of this translation work. It's happening in Sydney. It's happening in the Sydney school. It's transformed the primary and the secondary school curriculum for Sydney school, for Sydney school, Sydney City primary school kids and secondary school kids. And there's wonderful work going up on in research with Gardner and Nessie in that genre work, but we need to do the translation work that brings into curriculum and pedagogy, and raise awareness through changing our name to the Centre for Academic English instead of support units, that we are at the front of that, and that language matters, and that we can help everybody improve their writing as a result. I think we need to change the theories that we're using and do the work to pull it into our teaching and let everybody know that.
I've got a very short question or comment, and basically I come from a public-private partnership from INTU, and what I would say is that while I agree with everything that you've said, the biggest factor that I see, the biggest barrier that I see to what you are searching for is student numbers, and that one of the reasons that we need this place at the big table is to have a say in how many students are coming in, how many students are coming in on pre-sessional courses, for instance, because what happens is that you have a flood of students on a pre-sessional course, which means you need a flood of teachers on a pre-sessional course, and then those teachers go away and they disrupt the setup that you have. So, or you know, vice versa, you have students coming in all year round and you have to get teachers in. And how do you do that? And the university is affected by those student numbers, but you have no say, or very little say about how many students are coming in, how many students is reasonable. And nobody really has yet spoken about that, so I'd be interested to know what effect you think that is and whether you think it's a serious issue.
I think you're right, but I think, again, we shouldn't narrow our focus just on students. We have so much to offer the whole institution around in English language support, and I think if we just focus on the students, we will wither and die. And as I said earlier, we can provide a huge amount of support to academic staff. Yes, it's very sensitive to do that. We tried it at Nottingham, and it's very difficult to go to academic staff and say, are you worried about your English? Because they don't want to say, yes, I am. But actually, when they came to us for support, it was a very rewarding experience for all concerned. And again, as I said earlier, it's about how you frame these things. And if it is about, you know, the deficit model, then we're not going to get anywhere. But if it's, you know, supporting you to get your research published, supporting you to get your research grant bid successfully received, then I think we can diversify, and I think we do need to diversify our activities to be more engaged with the institution and what it's doing in its widest sense. If we just focus on pre-sessional and in-sessional, I think we're doomed. Ooh. Not doomed, but you know, who knows what's going to happen with pre-sessionals with all the craziness going on around the CELTS and the UKVI. We have to have a backup. And that, to me, is the obvious backup, is the service to the institution, to the academics, maybe, as well as the students.
Oh, thanks, yes. Just one question that's perhaps a little bit of a provocation in itself. I've been thinking about, I guess, there's been discussion here, obviously, about the marginalization of EAP practitioners within the institution and perhaps our own collusion in that marginalization. And I guess when I look at how marginalization of other groups in wider society occurs, my feeling is that people are marginalized not because they're powerless, but because they're deemed to be potentially too powerful and therefore dangerous in some way. So I guess my question is, how might EAP teachers be dangerous? Potentially.
How can EAP practitioners be dangerous?
If we were to embrace our power, what would happen?
That's a very good question. I kind of, when I did my bit for 10 minutes, suddenly something switched off and I thought I wouldn't have to say anything anymore. I think the idea of, I mean, subversive and talk of that is really just about, for me, about a certain disruption of patterns and routines. Mm-hmm. It's not being subversive in a Guy Fawkes sort of way, although sometimes. So I think it's the routine and patterns of thoughts, the habits that we all fall into, or I certainly do, where you try and see something slightly differently, and slightly, the kind of moments where you just stop and kind of question things. They're not kind of things that go on an everyday, all-day basis, but just to try at some point to see what can we do in the curriculum that engages more with knowledge. Are the assessments engaging? Whatever, the way that we teach, the timetabling, anything. It's very small things can have quite a big impact. So there are those kinds of, we've always done it that way, or that's the way we have to do it. It's challenging those thoughts. It's a disposition more than a particular solution. It's not like 10 top tips how to do something, but I think it's more a state of mind or a way of approaching your work than a particular solution. So it's not really about being a left-wing Guardian reader. It's more about understanding what values you have and to see how they sit and fit or don't with what's going on in your institution and what you do about it. That's not an answer, that's brilliant. I didn't answer the question.
I really enjoyed the ideas, so thank you for them. We've been thinking about how, I'm a line manager, and I'm thinking, well, how can I be subversive? I don't really know. And one of the things that keeps coming to mind is colleagues will be saying, but we don't have time, we don't have time. And one of the things that I think many people want to do, and it's come up in terms of contracts, in terms of teaching and workload, is how to balance or to get any research activity or scholarship activity, as it's called in our place, into your year of work. And I'm just wondering, as a line manager, rather than doing an appraisal where I say, so tell me about your teaching, if I were to turn it around and say, so what research plans do you have that you would like to do, and put that first, and then say, oh yeah, so how will that fit with your teaching? And so, or how will your teaching fit with that, rather? So we kind of shift things around a bit. And if people are having appraisals, then they could say perhaps, well, I could say about my teaching, but I'd much rather talk about my research plans, and will you please listen to those? And just shift people's ability to talk about their research plans as a real passion that they have, because I think many people here probably do. I just wonder how that might mix things around a bit.
Sorry, it was just a small question. Okay, it was really if their concern is time, because that's part of my problem right now. You know, if time and finance, I mean, how are you helping them just by asking that? Perhaps they can articulate that, but that doesn't give them the time they need. And I think sometimes, I didn't want to say this, but sometimes we're really quite complicit as well. I mean, it's pre-sessional time, so we get lots of staff in, some who are well qualified and some who aren't. We talk about knowledge. How much time do we have to help develop their knowledge, to help them to be really excellent practitioners and you know, to be the best at their job? Some of the things we're talking about, as a person who studied applied linguistics many years ago, but who subsequently also did a psychology and a literacy degree, some of the things we are talking about will actually put us up against other professionals as well. So we have to also think about how we might embrace other people who are doing other sorts of what we might call support or not support. Okay. And there are people who've actually entered the profession because they want to teach. I think that language is a lovely thing, but also not just meaning-making, but the mechanics of the language. For many of my colleagues who teach business or who teach physics, knowing how language works is a really special knowledge that they think we have that they don't have. So that's just a little bit, but I didn't really want to say anything.
Sorry for shoving the microphone in your face then. Okay. Yeah.
Can I just make just one little point about research? I'd really be a little bit cautious about the gap between practice and research. I think it's not a particularly useful model, and it's certainly slightly utopian model to assume that one practitioners want to do it. But I think scholarly activity provides a much more useful framework, because the focus is on teaching and learning, which is what we do. And it's making visible, it's making public, it's making available for critique and use by the community of what we do. So it should be integrated into what we do on a daily basis. Research has all sorts of notions attached to it, which may be something we wish to do, but it's also something that is slightly divorced from what we're good at. We're supposed to be good at teaching. Yeah. We may be good at research, and that's something else. But scholarly activity, I think, is where we make our work visible and public and available. That's really, I think, far more. It's got more affordances, more opportunities attached to that than research.
Okay. I kind of agree with that to a certain extent, but the problem is institutions aren't interested in teaching. Really, they're interested in research. I bet your list of strategies, Julie, that you found hardly mentioned teaching in them. I bet they were nearly all about research. All the money goes to research. People get time to do research. Okay, we're just teachers. Higher education institutions don't value practitioners and teachers as ourselves. And so I agree with you, Alex. If we want to make our own community and a thriving one within ourselves, scholarly activity is useful. But I think Julie's got a really good point. We need to latch on to this idea of helping people do research. That's really what I feel our new role is. Not helping people learn language, but helping them learn language to do research, helping them to latch up, to get into research, to get more bids, to get more money. If that's where the money is, if that's where the prestige is, surely we have to be there.
I think also the institutions do have teaching conferences. I've forgotten my thought now. But the institution, Leicester has a learning and teaching conference. I think it's had it for 2 years running or so. The University of Northampton also. So I think there is. But have you been? Do you go to these? I mean, that's one thing. No, I know, but I mean, how many, the question is how many of the EAP people go to these as well or know about them? That's a question, because they're not very well publicised to those places.
How many millions of pounds go into research in this country compared to how much goes into teaching?
Now we're not paid enough. Okay, so I'm not sure if we have time. No, I'm sorry, we don't have time. No, she's going to scream at me if I do.
If you don't do it now, before you go to bed tonight, please decide what you are going to do as a result of today.